That's the biggest trap people fall into in these kinds of movies, is they go too far. I may have gone too far in a few places.
Star Wars The Phantom Menace is definitely a film where, upon release, a lot of people felt it was a bit meh, and I think a lot of people wanted it to be more... But looking back on it after the amazing sequel trilogy, I think a lot of people have a newfound appreciation for the prequels, and I have to say, re-watching The Phantom Menace, it's way better than I remember. This film essentially acts as sort of the setup for the prequels. It helps build the world and sort of the time it's set in. And I can see why that kind of disappoints people. The prequels were meant to be the story of Anakin, and he only sort of has a small role in this. And I think that's why some people were disappointed. But without this film, I don't think the next two would be as rounded story-wise. I do like how this film shows us who the Jedi were, and you get to see him sort of doing the peacekeeping. You know, it's a very small story, and it does work on its own, this film. I think that's kind of why I like it. This sort of small story helps establish quite a lot. Like, it really shows us how the politics of Star Wars work. I know a few people don't really like that, but to be honest, I think it is kind of needed, and I don't think it hinders the film too much. And I think it's more of a positive than a negative.
I love democracy.
Because in reality, we do sort of need to know how it all works. If this is also the story of the rise of the Empire, we need to know how that came about. But also, it helps us establish sort of new worlds and settings. Like, Coruscant is a big important planet, and it's shown in all the prequel films. And I like how that's sort of the hub of the galaxy almost. It's cool seeing other planets that we haven't seen before as well. And, you know, we're not just going back to ones we've seen. So there is that sort of risk there, and I do like that. And like I said, this film does a lot of setting up, especially with the characters. And I've always liked how you get to see Anakin as a boy. I think it's really cool how we get to see sort of his story full circle, his entire life. And I think it's also interesting you see Obi-Wan as quite young as well. So you can really see them sort of grow up. Like, a lot of people who say they should have cut this film and start from Attack of the Clones, I think are kind of missing the point. This film is definitely to sort of set up the characters, and, you know, this is kind of like an origin film. You know, we get to see Anakin isn't like every other Jedi, he is different, and that kind of segues into his downfall. So I think it is really cool, this film. We get to see sort of the origins of a lot of characters. Speaking of the characters, I think the cast do a pretty good job on the whole. I know some people have a gripe with the kid, but, you know, he's a kid, what do you expect? But I have to say, I think Liam Neeson as Qui-Gon Jinn, to say he's only in one film, he's definitely become a fan favourite, and I think that's because he does do such an interesting performance, and he does get a lot to work with. I think he's a really interesting character in the aspect that he is sort of this wise Jedi, sort of like we know Yoda and Obi-Wan are in the originals, but we get to see sort of this rebellious nature, and I've always liked that. You know, he's not your stereotypical one, and I think that's very interesting, especially when you put into the aspect that he's Obi-Wan's master. It gives it a very new perspective on sort of the originals. Speaking of Obi-Wan, he doesn't really do a lot in this film, and he more shines towards the end when he has his fight with Darth Maul, and he very much is more of a minor character, but I think that's fine because you sort of see him grow. He has like 3 films to grow, so I don't think, you know, he needs to be the main focus now. Him sort of defeating the first Sith in 1,000 years, I think is, again, another cool trait of Obi-Wan, and it sort of, again, adds to the legend of him that, you know, a lot of people did want to see from the originals. I do think Anakin's fine in the film. I think he's acted as a fine job. You know, he's a kid. And I've always liked how you can sort of see hints to, you know, what's to come when you do look back on this film.
I'll try spinning. That's a good trick.
And again, he isn't in the film a lot, but this is sort of more of pushing him into the story and how he got there in the first place. And it's setting up the next films, which I think is great. I also like seeing Padme as well. I've always liked how you can sort of easily get the sense that she is Leia's mother. I've always liked that, and I think this is probably the best she is in a film. You know, you really get that essence that she is Leia's mother, whereas in a few of the others, she didn't do as much, I don't think. I think she does the most in this one. Darth Maul as a character as well. You know, he's sort of the main antagonist, I guess. But he isn't really a character. I think the Clone Wars sort of more goes into that. But to be honest, I don't know if the film really would have even had room for him. You know, it's all there's already a lot of characters in it. And I think he does a fine job of, you know, he's meant to be mysterious, so it's sort of like the less you know, the better almost. I know that sounds weird, but I do like how he's sort of just this threat that comes out of nowhere. and before they have really time to register it, they've sort of got rid of him. They can't really get into, the questions and stuff. So it sort of creates this very paranoid attitude. And I like how that sort of spills into the next film, and probably into the most controversial character of the film, Jar Jar.
Jar Jar is a key to all this.
I mean, I don't really mind him. I don't get why he got all the hate, to be honest. He ain't that annoying. And, some of his jokes are a bit stupid or whatever. But, sometimes he's a bit funny. And I don't think he harms the film. I'm never like, can we just, leave him out or whatever. I think he's quite of an interesting aspect. Because he's just sort of a general dude. I think it's sort of interesting you get to see that everyman. He's not really, he's not even a fighter at all, really. And I think that's sort of cool. Sort of seeing just a normal person. A lot of people also complain about the CGI in this film, but I honestly don't think it's too bad. I think probably the worst part is the Gungan battle at the end. The background is just awful looking.
Stylistically designed to be that way, and you can't undo that.
But other than that, I think it's pretty good. To say it's from 1999, good, like the pod racing scene, I think is excellent. Like, you can't really fault it. And I think Jar Jar is pretty good as well. This film's over 20 years old now, and he doesn't pull you out of it how fake he is. So I think, honestly, it's fine. I think maybe Attack of the Clones is the one that maybe takes the CGI too far, but I'll speak about that another time. The action in this film is, I think, pretty good. Like, obviously the highlight is the Darth Maul fight at the end, and I think it's great because it's something we haven't seen before. It's a very quick, fast-paced fight, and I think it's interesting seeing two Jedis in the Prime fight as well. So, it's something new we didn't really get from the originals, and I think it is probably one of the best duels going. I've always liked the moment how the sort of final part with Qui-Gon Jinn and Darth Maul, there's no music, and I've always liked that. It sort of, it feels very contained in that aspect. It feels real, I think, at that point. And I've always liked the bit how you sort of see Obi-Wan hyping himself up to go out there, and then you get this really quick sort of choreography between Ewan McGregor and Ray Park. Just great. Like, there's a lot of stuff to like in this duel. I do think as well the combat's great throughout as well. There's a new enemy this time around. We've got the droids, and I'm glad they didn't try and just do, stormtroopers again. I mean, we got something new. Some people don't like them. I think they're fine, again. And I think something new and interesting.
What you don't realize is that these guys really aren't very efficient.
And I think upon looking back, a lot of people do sort of like that originality. You also get quite a lot of space combat at the end as well. And I think that's pretty much well done. I think it's always been well done in Star Wars. It's not much new. And, this doesn't really push the boundaries of it, but it's fine. Now, the music of the film is pretty great as usual with Star Wars. However, I do think it's on the weaker side when it comes to original scores. I think there's not much that stands out. I'd say pretty much it's just Duel of the Fates. That's the only sort of iconic original piece out of this film. There is a moment earlier on with Anakin starting the pod racer that I've always liked. But other than that, it isn't a very unique soundtrack, and I think a lot of the other films do a very good job of providing new original scores for that individual film. I have to say, looking back on the film, it's not as bad as everyone says it is, and I do think it has moments that are genuinely good. And I do think it builds upon the world in a way that's interesting and new, because this is the first film following the originals, and I think that's why it sort of let down a lot of people, because it isn't the quality of the original 3.
I want you to get out of this office right now.
But I still think it's quite an okay film, and it's definitely not a step in the wrong direction. But I can see the issues of the lack of practical effects as well. Like, there's not much puppetry work in this film, which is a real shame. It does use more CGI. But yeah, I would say overall, this film is okay. Like, it's probably not going to be anyone's favourite, but I don't think it's my least favourite either. And I think it gets a lot right. The politics angle is another bit of an issue, and I'd say, as a kid, that's probably quite boring, but I think sort of maybe looking back on it, you can sort of see why it is needed. And it is quite a complex story it tells. So I'd say it's definitely much better looking back on it. And I think overall I'd give it probably about a 7 out of 10. It does quite a lot right, but it does have those minor issues that sort of keep it down. And it following the previous 3 originals, it's definitely not at the quality of them. And I think that's why, because there was that huge contrast between them. But just because it's straight after a great film doesn't mean it's a bad one. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
The interesting thing is they call it pyroprocessing, but it's a molten salt process. They're dissolving this thing in a molten salt, and they're doing electrochemistry on it. Why don't they call it molten